Edith Farnsworth originally didn't even hire Mies van der Rohe. She had Keck and Keck, very very well known in Chicago, local modernist architects to design the house. And they told her, once you agree to the design program, we design your house, and that's what you get. This is a business. It can't draw on. And of course, Edith had never built anything before, and neither had her family, really. They all owned very old historic properties. And this was very exciting to her, and the more she educated herself about architecture, contemporary architecture, the more excited she got. And of course, she saw Mies's name again and again in these books and magazines. And through two mutual friends, of course, she meets Mies at a dinner party and decides to move forward. The house, of course, turns into something other than what she envisioned, a very simple cottage by the river. But she, of course, thought so highly of Mies and just really became enamored of him, and also, I think, of helping to revive his American career. She saw herself as a patron, not just a client, and that's very important. And she thought that she was building something, of course, of great import. So in 1947, the famous exhibition at MoMA, curated by Philip Johnson, the Mies retrospective, and Frank Lloyd Wright and other influential people were there. And I think that's really what sealed the deal. I think Edith felt that she was building something very important and had to move forward. And we know that the relationship ended badly, of course. But then Peter Palumbo, of course, had been working with Mies van der Rohe very closely on Mansion House Square project in London, which didn't happen, unfortunately, because Prince Charles and other factors, or King Charles now, and other factors, really unfortunate. But he was a big Mies van der Rohe fan, and he would come to Chicago quite often. In 1962, he came to the Farnsworth House with Dirk Lohan. She wasn't here at the time. He looked in the windows, but of course he had to see it. And then in '68, when he came back to Chicago at the end of Mansion House Square project, he was going to have dinner with, or lunch, I think, with Mies, and opened the paper and sees the ad for sale, and calls, and she happened to be here, and she said, come out today for lunch. And he did, and he basically bought it on the spot. He gave her a deposit, and they worked out a payment plan for 4 years, and so he didn't take possession until 1972. He regarded it as a monument. I mean, he just thought it was one of the most important works of modern architecture that ever existed, and he really restored it. And then, of course, the flood came in 1996, and he had to restore it again. But he was his own conservator. Dirk was the architect. Dirk Lohan, Mies's grandson, was the project architect for the 1972 to 74 restoration and for the 96 to 97 restoration. But Lord Palumbo had a house here in Plano, and he was here throughout the restoration project, very involved, and made a lot of decisions. And it was quite a lot of money, of course, and since the 1970s, he had been opening the property for charity events, charity tours for the Art Institute, and the new Museum of Contemporary Art in Chicago was sort of a contemporary art society. It really didn't have a museum space in the beginning, and other groups like that. And then, of course, he marries Hyatt in 1986, and they have multiple properties, and they make the decision to open Farnsworth to the public when they're not in residence. So they built a temporary visitor center and hired, well, I'm not sure what the arrangement was, but asked Zaha Hadid to design a big visitor center here that would house Lord Palumbo's collections, and he is an inveterate collector. And then, for a number of circumstances, they didn't move forward with that design, and what was built as a temporary visitor center is now our permanent visitor center. I wish we had the Zaha Hadid, but that's okay. Water under the bridge, lost opportunity. But Lord Palumbo, of course, is still with us. He and Hyatt have been very giving and sharing, open and sharing information. So there's quite a history between Dr. Farnsworth era and the Palumbo era. It was sold at auction by Lord Palumbo in 2003, and John Bryan, who was very involved on the national scene in historic preservation. He had just finished fundraising for Millennium Park in Chicago, and he hopped straight onto this to raise money to save the Farnsworth House. And so the Friends of Farnsworth was formed as a 501c3 nonprofit, and they solicited donations very quickly from around the world and managed to win it at auction. And Richard Gray, the famed Chicago gallerist, represented them in the auction. And at the last minute, he had to put in another $600,000 of his own money to win the bid, and thankfully he did. So the National Trust and Landmarks Illinois co-own really the Farnsworth House. It's owned by the National Trust, but it has a preservation and conservation easement on the house itself and on the land surrounding it. And Landmarks Illinois works very closely with the trust to make management decisions, preservation decisions about the property. I think all museums are different, and so much is determined by not only their mission, but their location and the audiences they serve. And because this is a country house, we make the landscape and the experience of the landscape integral to the visit. We try to even imbue our digital programming with a part of that experience so that people really, why would you build a glass house in the middle of nature? And Mies talks about that everything in this house should be neutral because really the focal point is all around you. You really look past the house to focus on the changing seasons and the changing light throughout the day, the movement, the various textures. I mean, it's a very relaxing house because the house melts away. You know, it's a pavilion in nature. So I think that experience is so important to people, especially people who live in an urban environment and don't have access to that, or it's something that maybe the wealthy have access to, but the average person doesn't, and the average young person certainly doesn't have the means. So we try to invite people to spend time on the property. We have virtual reality tours and online exhibition guides, and then we have Wi-Fi at the house and the visitor center. And so for $10, very modest price, they can come to Farnsworth, hike, lay in the grass, come sit in the chairs and do a virtual reality tour, which has been very popular, of course, during COVID, without having to take a structured guided tour. Of course, most people who come here do want that experience. We're trying, of course, to get our guides to ask questions and but there's so much information. That's the challenge. And we try to, before people arrive, we make sure that they go to our website because there's so much to read and watch. Of course, there's so much online content that's not even linked to from our website. But we want them to be prepared and informed before their visit, if possible. And then they can, of course, ask intelligent, engaging questions. But we have so many people who come here who don't know a thing about architecture. So you have so many people on a given tour or a given day at so many levels. And as you say, ages, levels of mobility, different languages spoken. So it's challenging. There's no doubt about it. This is a challenge for Haus Lemke too. It's like if you can't have a Mies van der Rohe design your visitor center, who should design it, you know? And you know, there's been talk over the years, do we build a Mies's 50 by 50 house here or a 70 by 70 version for the visitor center? I think the danger, though, is that because that becomes more spectacular than the house itself, which, of course, you know, is over 70 years old. So the approach we've taken here is that the landscape really determined our visitor center. We want people to experience the Midwest because of the openness and all the fields and the long vistas. And then they come approaching Farnsworth. We have 60 acres, and the first thing they see is this giant hayfield with a pole barn in it, and then our gallery, which is a silo, our corn crib. And so it really belongs more to the landscape and the context than to the house, than the Miesian vocabulary or international style. So that's the way we've approached it, is that you know, it's a little more neutral than trying to create this architectural dialogue with the house. It really has a dialogue with the setting, and it serves as a transition or a gateway from the context, you know, to the house. I think also, of course, the house, as you say, Haus Lemke, and then here too, there's only so much you can do with the space because you have to preserve it, you have to protect it, you have to restore it. And the visitor pavilions, visitor services provide gallery space, provide opportunities for interventions that are at a scale or complexity that you wouldn't do with an historic structure. Oftentimes we have foul weather in northern climates, extreme weather, weather extremes. We need safe and comfortable spaces for people to take off their coats, to watch an orientation, to learn about the space, to shop, enjoy a cup of coffee, whatever it is, use the facility, use the restrooms. So we're certainly having conversations now about what the Museum of the 21st Century looks like in terms of visitor expectations and comfort and amenities. And I hope that we will be improving our 20-some-year-old facilities in the next few years. We'll see. I think for Haus Lemke, if you want to be a major tourist destination in Berlin, or even for arts tourism, what is your audience? Who is your audience, and what are their expectations? And of course, you have to cater to them and keep them comfortable and in a good mood and wanting to support you. So it is very important. I think that the idea of IIT and Haus Lemke and Villa Tugendhat and Farnsworth House and on, I mean, it should be a consortium. We should be sharing ideas and collaborating on projects together and discovering new opportunities for partnerships. And there's strength in numbers. So I think it's a wonderful thing.